Okay, so we're now streaming live. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we've got uh, two different presentations. Basically, I'm going to start, and then Sandra is going to do a separate one. I have chosen to report on this lovely book called Long Life, Honey in the Heart, a story of initiation and eloquence from the shores of a Mayan lake by Martin Prechtel, who was an American living in New Mexico. I'm just going to do a real quick kind of review of his situation. I'm going to mute people too, since we're recording here. Okay, it looks like we got everybody. So Martin Prechtel was, I don't think he's dead yet, half Swiss and half Native American. Got divorced and kind of disillusioned and just headed south down through Mexico. And his previous book, called Secrets of the Talking Jaguar, chronicles that trip down through Mexico, where he ended up in Santiago, Atitlan, Guatemala, where he apprenticed to a shaman. And this book picks up after he's become a shaman. Now, why did I choose to report on this book at this time? The reason is, at a board meeting, the last board meeting, we discussed having a presentation on initiation. I guess Jean Gagliardi was originally thought that we thought he would be doing something on initiation. And I thought, well, this would be a really interesting follow-up, because that's what the book is about. But Jean talked about dreams instead. Fortunately, it fits in with what I think Sandra's going to talk about with regard to indigeneity. And this is a look into an indigenous way of life, what it was like before it was killed off basically by the forces of mental rational consciousness. So we pick up in Santiago, Atitlan, Guatemala, along Lake Atitlan, which is kind of in the southern part of Guatemala, near but not next to the western shore, among a tribe called pardon me if I butcher this, I don't speak the language, Tsuturhil. So he, as I said, he apprenticed to the shaman, but despite being a shaman, eventually becoming a full-fledged shaman, he was never initiated as the adolescent boys were initiated. So he went through an initiation like that of the adolescent boys. And although he describes a bit of that, that's not really the bulk of the book. The bulk of the book is the story of his becoming the chief of the boys' initiation process, which of course was kind of like a second initiation for him. So it's not just a story, and it's not just an autobiography. It's a teaching story, really, about what it means to be human, to live in relationship with the divine. It's also a story about the efficient, magical, and mythic consciousness, and living from within that, and how it was destroyed by the forces of mental consciousness. So this happened in our lifetime, in the 60s or 70s. I'm not exactly sure which. And by the 1980s, it was the end of, this cultural expression. American corporate interests aligned with Guatemalan government interests helped to bring about this demise. So we're on the shore of Lake Atitlan in southern Guatemala. The lake is surrounded by volcanic mountains. This area in the highlands is known as male Earth, and female Earth is the lowlands down by the ocean. Now, initiations, he says, are not done for the initiate's benefit, but to keep the earth alive. And there are various stages of initiations through life, which are types of welcoming ceremonies. This book is mainly about the stage from adolescence to adulthood. But the first welcoming is obviously when a baby is born. It is a week-long ritual to welcome the child into the village. I won't go through the whole ceremony because that's not my focus, but only wanted to say that that childbirth itself is attended by many, including all the lactating mothers in the village. And after the baby's born and after the baby is washed in special waters that were collected by the father, the baby is passed around to each lactating woman to nurse so that he or she would never feel like a stranger in any compound in the village. So it made the child feel intensely received and welcomed. He says, in the minds of the Tsutuhe, being suckled from the breasts of women from every clan in the village, my son would now be related to the whole village in the deepest way possible. This was the beginning of initiation because the Tsutuhe knew that the smell of one's mother was strong and that the sweet animal smell of all the village mothers huddled together lived in your memory like the house in the village where you were born. Once more, this made you feel even more intensely received and at home in your village and welcome to come through every doorway. Adults sometimes had to stop quarrels among their peers by reminding them how they had suckled from the other mother's mother or grandmother. This milk giving was a peacemaking thing. Women were proud to come sit and talk to the mother, breastfeed the new child, then get to work fixing up something in the compound. And from a modern standpoint, there's a wisdom in doing that and passing the baby around. It increases the microbiome population and diversity in the baby's gut, which helps him or her feel more resilient and healthy. So first-time mothers then bring this birthing mother a pot of soup so that she doesn't have to worry about cooking for the whole week of the birthing ritual. So why are initiations necessary to keep the earth alive? I mean, isn't life on autopilot? Animal instincts to reproduce and all that? Well, yes and no. Even humans that have the instinct to reproduce, even humans have the instinct to reproduce, but unlike animals, we can really mess it up. And yes, there is the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. And initiations help to serve that force stay life-giving and not become death-inducing. One more rational comment. I realized that we can think of these rituals as working against entropy, so negentropy. That is, a way of putting energy back into the system to keep it from devolving into chaos. And like the pagamento ceremony of the Kogi, which many of you have heard me talk about, the Tsutuhil believe it is necessary to give to the gods so that they keep giving to us. And like the Kogi, who say that payment is necessary for what we take from Mother Earth, the Tsutuhil say that we steal from the mother. And the initiation is intended to help you understand how Mother Earth feels about that. Ceremonies even out our indebtedness to her and preserve our interdependence on one another. When things are taken from nature and the gods that are huge and are used to cause human ease, comfort, recreation, or excess, the definition of which is not determined by humans, but by the spirits of those things, then huge deliberate sacrifice has to be made to the deified earth. Without these sacrifices, large wars, diseases, and depression would take over the earth or create enough death to pay for the comfort. Our comfort is not the God's prime cause for having humans on earth. I don't know, maybe we're in the middle of that right now. The Tsutuhil understand intuitively that life is an infinite game. You play so that your descendants can keep playing. It's not about winning or losing, but about being eloquent and increasing the beauty in the world. So daily life in the village was hard and unglamorous. It consisted mainly of subsistence farming, as well as fishing, and a few various crafts like canoe building. So they courted the deities with beautiful hand-woven and embroidered clothes, beautiful words, smells, food, and liquor. To give you a flavor of what living a more magically conscious way of life was like, let me relate a bit about parrots. In the wild, when parrots try to eat something with their large, ungainly beaks, most of it falls to the ground, which then feeds the earthbound animals, such as tapirs. There is an evolutionary symbiosis at work. Well, Martine had a green parrot that he raised from an injured chick. It spoke 3 languages, Mayan, Spanish, and English. There's a really funny story about this parrot, which I don't really have time to go into. I'm going to read a short bit, but maybe later, if you remind me, I'll read you the funny story. So, in hopes of helping their little children to speak well, young women would feed their babies crumbs of food that an eloquent parrot had dropped. The girls would show their babies to the parrot, who eyeballed the children sideways and shuffled nervously back and forth on her smooth pole. Then they would utter phrases to the parrot, and the bird would begin to whistle a song or repeat something she'd heard earlier. Ideally, the baby might begin to converse with the ornery green beast, who would then reply back, and everything would be set. After rewarding the bird with a set of well-made, thick corn tortillas, the older women would stretch out their shawls under the birds as they greedily tore the tortillas to bits, eating only a few pieces. The highly prized remains of the tortilla that rained into their shawls would be taken home to the mother's hut, toasted hard over a fire, then ground to dust on the grinding stone. The resulting flour was then mixed with the waters of confidence. These are the special ones that the father goes to get, and cooked into a thin porridge. This was fed to the babies when they began to teethe in hopes that the child would magically ingest the parrot's enthusiasm, manifesting her ability with speech, enabling the child to begin making the sounds of the ancestral tongue. Now, there's a vast spiritual hierarchy in this community as well, in this culture. And the people in this hierarchy are very aware and in tune beings. They know what is going on and why. And this story that Prechtel tells is about his own initiation into this hierarchy as he becomes the chief in charge of the boy's initiation, which is a months-long process, nearly a year. Why do they have this ritual? Adolescence, as I'm sure you remember, is a tumultuous time. It can involve rebellion, lust, idealism, and even the denial of death, all powerful forces in young people. Simultaneously, the parents also resist the impending loss of their little boy or girl. It is a transition from dependence to independence. And he describes these forces with a beautiful metaphor. He says, the adolescent river of amorous fire that gushed through the young men's longing bodies had an inebriating quality. Overflowing the banks of reason, this delicious flood excavated a young man's mind, washing away all but a smattering of what he learned as a child. The hollowness that remained was a painful longing to be filled with more of what had made it hollow. This hollowness was natural and was meant to be filled with his soul, for it was the young man's soul that had to be stolen by death in the confusion of that flood. That hollow place was called the throne of the goddess. It was here that a man's personal soul was supposed to sit, at home in her regal chair, using the boy as her bench. Only old chiefs and priestesses knew that the goddess a boy longed for in his tearful and moody desperation was his first true bride. Old people knew that a flood-hollowed boy saw this first bride, the goddess, in the eyes of every dear-eyed girl in the village. He saw her in every sway, surge, twist, and trot of every tinsel-flashing, copper-skinned girl whose barely parted lips exposed the shell-white knives of her water-speaking mouth. Every girl was a goddess at that point. When a boy finally settled on a particular goddess, if he married her before he learned that the real goddess was living in the underworld, he would remain empty, trying to fill his goddess place with regular girls, one after another. In his longing search to rescue the goddess from the underworld, he would hopefully find his own goddess bride, a smaller goddess-like being. This bride we called the soul of a young man. The hollow place of his desire could receive his soul, but not the overheavy, overly burdening, too great, too delicious, too powerful goddess of the flowering earth. Only then, when that goddess part of himself, well seated, could his mysterious marriage with his soul bride, his deified personal spirit, give birth to a child. The child of a boy married to his divine soul bride was called Acha, meaning man. Only an initiated man, or Acha, could marry a woman and not be miserable and disappointed. An uninitiated man was one who didn't know his first love was a divine being, a being that lived and kissed him in nature, as a village in the landscape of the world. If he tried to find her first in a human woman, he would become angry and depressed because she could not be that goddess. It was the same for girls, since the husband of an uninitiated woman would have to be a god, or he would be trivialized and discarded as a failure. Or worse yet, she would start believing that he was a god. Uninitiated men beat women for not being goddesses. They left women behind who turned out to have thoughts and opinions of their own. Or they allowed themselves to be ground to dust year by year by women who they wanted and hoped would miraculously turn into a goddess later on. Women had the same experience with their husbands, men who disappointed them when they refused to be the gods the women longed to be loved by. Before initiation, most men try to fill that young hollowness, that empty place carved by the flood of desire, with something that will continue the flood, trying to fill the hole with more and more of what made it hollow. That hollowness is death itself, and it is in death's kingdom that the root of all possibility and beauty resides. Desire is death's shovel and digs the hole where one's heart once beat. Stolen by death, it is this hole, this hollowness, where the heart, transformed by its visit to the underworld and its rescue made possible by the courting of an eloquent, weeping man, will be replanted, giving it a home. It is in this very hollowness where life will burst forth into a fire of flowers as it takes root once again, finally at home. If this hollow place that occurs in adolescence is not negotiated with great guidance by the mentors and chiefs, then a boy could grow uninitiated into the physical size of a man, but not yet be a man spiritually. If he should attempt to fill that holy hollowness with alcohol, food, women, fighting, war, ruthlessness, business, or anything else that resembles the delicious, inebriating quality of that first hole dug into his life by desire and death, then he will always be courting death. He will probably either find his death or begin destroying things. So that gives you, pretty much the whys and wherefores of, why they conduct this particular ritual. So when boys and girls were seen to be courting, which involves elaborate rituals and customs, in themselves, their courting doesn't go unnoticed, and the elders report those teens who have fallen in love to the spiritual hierarchy. Now, this initiation of these courting beings, the one whom desire is flooding, was mandatory at first, because by being mandatory, it took the guilt away from the parents for sending their child away for nearly a year into the care of, these chiefs and mentors. As mental consciousness started creeping into Santiago Atitlan, mainly through a group of uninitiated boys who had been sent to school in the city and who got politically involved, the government tried to stop the initiations. And Prechtel was the one who proposed to make them voluntary, except that it was still conducted pretty much as if it were mandatory. We see heartbreakingly how over time, the forces of mental consciousness overpower the beauty of this way of life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Girls and boys who are seen courting are taken by the initiating chiefs and chieftesses, 13 of each, to live apart from their families for several months, boys and girls separately, of course. Even the ritual for taking the teens from their families is psychologically astute. The chiefs go to the house and sometimes even have to nab the boy as he tries to escape out the back. What they say to the boy is um, is beautifully poetic, and I'm going to have John read this passage because it's well, one, he's a poet, and it's males talking to males. So number one, please, John.
You lords of this earth, you ladies of the earth, we, the 800 shimmering, the 800 flashing, come at your feet, come at your branches, desiring the company of your first sunlight, your first dawn light. As he, our flower, our sprout, on the branches of this, the trunk of the village, the complete gathering, is held alive by the same ancestral root, who yesterday and the day before, and then today, we came searching, shimmering, we came desiring, flashing, in the presence of all our mutual ancestors, to hold him in our branches, flowering, so that he may become cooked and ripe, so he may become the carrier, the sacrificer, the bringer of her, the maker of the house of the holy.
So imagine a throng of brightly dressed people showing up at your door and taking your child and saying those words to you and that child. And then the boy is coached on what to say back. So, John, number two. Oh, a chief whispers this in his ear. So the chief is telling him, this is what you say to your parents. Go ahead.
Mother, Father, look upon me well. This is the last you will see of me, like this, in this form. As the earth's face is a fruit on the tree of all ancestral given life, so I am a fruit on your tree. When you see me again, I will have a new face and different one. Please don't abandon me. Please don't forget me. I won't abandon you. I won't forget you. Long life, honey in the heart, no evil. 13 thank yous.
When they lead the boy away, telling him not to look back, the boys always do anyway, and they see their parents fighting hard to get their child back. This is part of the ritual. The boy needs to know that he will be missed by his family, especially his mother, and that his absence creates a vacuum. This ritual acting out allows the parents to express their grief publicly so that it doesn't get buried inside or turned into enmity against the chiefs or the village. The young girls, Prechtel says, usually went along without such a big fight, probably because they are less isolated from the village during their initiation. Although I don't think he describes all of what happens during the initiations, here are some of the activities and experiences that the boys go through in a very experiential type of learning. So one of the first things they must do is steal from their own mother. These fox kits that since the beginning of this world were told humans were thieves, holy thieves, weak thieving beings who stole every bit of what humans claim as theirs, their abilities, their material wealth, and their territory. It was all stolen from nature, which in the end is just a fancy name for the holy face of the gods. Anciently, the Tsutuhil had discovered that if humans were forced to steal within the ritual context of initiation, then after they completed their initiations, men wouldn't be inclined to steal. They would understand that all thieveries are against the Great Mother, and that all survival is a direct thieving from she who births and bears all fruit, corn, meat, fiber, and warmth from wood. These were all her children that we humans cut, kill, harvest, butcher, and consume, some of us with no consciousness of where any of it really comes from. All ritual has to do with this understanding and with making things good again with the old woman. The reality of this ran through all Mayan thinking. It didn't cause shame, but only the awareness of the shame in it. To enforce the meaning of this on youth, the initiator's first task was to teach them to rob their mothers. All these old righteous men who'd been telling you for years never to steal were now teaching you how and forcing you to do it. None of the rain boys, as the initiates were called, wanted to do that, as it wouldn't bring them any love or honor from the women, which is mostly what boys want. The hatred and disrepute that would be heaped upon a thief who robbed his beloved mother would teach the boys exactly how the spirits viewed humans in general. Those men and women who never give anything to the spirit or weep for the huge holes they dig into the heart of the mother of all life in the name of human survival and conceit. In order to learn true respect, boys had to first understand the destructiveness of disrespect. For this reason, the boys were sent off to steal a certain type of wide-mouthed, heavy cooking tub from their mother's own hut. These weren't just any old pots that they were asking them to steal, but those earned by the adult women in their initiation. These pots represented their services to the sacred and their marriage. To steal one, you had to climb under it. Indeed, they were so ample that a teenager could climb right in. They were delicate things, and the slightest jar the wrong way would cause the earthenware tubs to crash to pieces, which was absolutely not part of what we were doing. To ruin your mother's pot was more unthinkable than stealing it. So they must all also build the hut where they all live together. They go across the lake to get certain types of branches. It involves going up high in the trees and cutting them while hanging from a rope. Essentially. It is an overnight activity that helps to build endurance and helps the boys to be broken down physically while also wearing the ego down. It is strenuous, but not as strenuous as what they're being prepared to do. Later, the chiefs take them out into the deep forest for several days to a place that represents the underworld, where they will ultimately have to go to retrieve their souls. Here they are told ancestral stories that will, if they pay attention, help them with their final journey to the underworld to fight death. This activity also involves getting them drunk so that they do not become drunks by trying to fill their hollowness with something other than their own soul. He describes how when you cut down a type of huge palm tree, the sap from the roots gushes up into the stump. And by hollowing out the stump, the sappy liquid collects there and ferments. In their drunkenness, the chiefs get the boys to gush about Mother Earth, the goddess, and to bless her and to bless everything. Again, getting drunk is something that they've been taught as children not to do. So this enforced transgression shows them that when rule following is necessary and when sometimes it is necessary to break the rules. In the initiation, there's also a civilizing process that takes place in the village. During the initiation time, the chiefs are not allowed to speak directly to anyone except their immediate family. So if they do need to talk to somebody else about something, they would take an initiate and speak through that boy. The chief would whisper in the boy's ears what to say, and the boy would say it, as well as repeat back what the other person said. This way, the boys first parrot the chief's words, but later they will have to speak in the florid, poetic, courtly manner on their own. For example, they must bless a sacrificial turkey, describing in beautiful imagery how wonderful this turkey is, what a great boon its death will be to the people. And then later, they must go on an errand without the chief and ask a favor of another adult, a specific favor that the chief gives them. Now, if they do not do a good job in asking, the adult just ignores the boy, who then, must return back to their hut empty-handed. Then he is coached again and again, sometimes by the previous year's initiates, but would be allowed to fail until he eventually succeeded. Their words had to touch the other person's heart. This taught them eloquence, which was highly regarded in this culture. Finally, the last trial was to go to the underworld and fight death. This involved a 3-day walk to the coastal lowland, the female earth, bearing gifts from the highland where they live, including fish. So they had to get there before the fish spoiled. They could figure out where to go if they had paid attention to the stories they were told while in the woods harvesting the palm tree and drinking its elixir. They carried on their backs in the traditional way of carrying a heavy load. You put a strap on your forehead and it goes around and you've got this big pack on your back. So they would carry a box with offerings to the deities along the way, as well as gifts for the coastal people, who would cook the fish and give them food and shelter and gifts to bring back. This was a dangerous journey through mountain passes and jungles. They needed all the survival skill they learned in the preceding months. They didn't eat or drink during the trip either, in the coming and going, only when they were with the coastal people. They would, in turn, get their soul bride from the female earth. Each person's box would be filled with cocoa pods, fruits, and a huge palm flower, together weighing 75 pounds. These fruits, like their souls, were unripe, and it was the boys' task to ripen their soul and hence the fruit. The ripening process would require them to stay focused, positive, and to pray to become ripe. Oops. Hang on a sec. I have to find the page. Each man's personal soul bride was also a particle of the bride soul goddess of all life. In other words, every man of the same age set was ripe for love because his heart had been stolen by death. By facing death in a ritual struggle, he might retrieve his own soul. By then putting all of their retrieved soul brides together, the goddess of the earth would be reassembled from these different individual souls. The peculiarity and uniqueness of each man's personal soul, his bride, was equally a different organic aspect of the great goddess, whose heart was held in a mutual trust in the form of a very well protected, powerful bundle that other rituals succeeded in retrieving from the holy death. So the 3-day journey home, again without food or water, was a test of stamina, and some didn't make it. It was truly a dangerous journey. When they were expected back, the chief sent scouts to see when the boys crested the last hill. The entire village would be alerted and would come out to welcome them home. At this event, the year Prechtel was in charge, 30,000 people came, more than normal because of the attempts to shut down this initiation by the government. The chiefs formed a line with their wood staffs called the edge of the world. The villagers would literally tug of war like pull the initiates across the line away from death back into life. In doing so, they were also pulling life and the goddess of water back to earth. There was no going back across that line. This was a re-welcoming back to the village, out of their youth, but not yet fully men. From the edge of the world, everyone danced back into the village. But the boys were not done, not ripe, not cooked. Meanwhile, the girls, as part of their initiation, had to prepare a certain type of cocoa drink for the boys, and their test was to have it cooked just right at just the right time. If it wasn't, it would sour, which would indicate a failed initiation. The widows would feed the boys as thank you for avenging the deaths of their husbands. And later, at the very end, the old grandfathers would cook and feed the girls. But the boys' initiation was not over yet. Although they brought the goddess home, she was not yet assembled. The boys still had 3 days in isolation from the village, during which they continued to ripen their souls. Their boxes of fruit had to ripen in these 3 days. If the fruit was still green at the end, that constituted failure. If they hadn't transformed themselves from arrogant, immature, or disrespectful youth, the fruit wouldn't ripen. So they burned incense and prayed. After the 3rd day, the hut was opened up. Their boxes were taken outside, and the spiritual leaders opened up each box and held up the fruit to show the assembled village whether it was ripe. After they were all done, the girls had prepared another type of ceremonial drink and served it to the whole village. Indeed, a feast for the whole village was prepared. Finally, the boys had to assemble the house of the world, which was made of the fruit and flowers they brought back, as well as cedar branches, wild animals in cages, and a huge cooking pot signifying the mother's womb, which was placed at the very top. This pot was given, it didn't have to be stolen. In this way, they brought life with a capital L back to the village, restarted her heart in the spring, and made her whole again. This house of the world was built on a very sacred site, which the Catholics had commandeered and built a church on top of. So the house was, ironically, built inside the church. After it was completed, a whole burst of more ceremonies and celebrations began. This intertribal courting was a form of peaceful warfare in which the men's instinct for heroism, pride, honor through competition, struggle, territorialism were made into useful attributes that could make beauty and therefore keep the earth alive. In the same way, both the adversarial Mayan kings of the past and the initiating chiefs of today sent their troops to conquer the other with friendship, using gifts of fish, flowers, and archaic, tear-inspiring discourse as their weapons. So, just a couple of themes. We've got a few minutes. I'm sure you saw the intermarriage that had to occur before outer marriage. The efficient magic and mythic in living in a world in which everything was sacred. Ritual as a way to counteract entropy, and the enforced breaking of rules to give you the experience that shows you why the rules are there. This initiation is obviously an alchemical process, although not identical to the alchemical processes of the European tribes. So, thank you. I'm